Om Bhurabhuva Swaha Tat Saviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodhayatam. Om Tat Sat Hrihi Om. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say thank you very much for that beautiful chant, a mantra, to begin this Jive Talk with an auspicious prayer. I welcome you back with great pleasure, Sri Dharma Pravartaka Acharya, for the second time to survive the Jive after a long hiatus of 5 years, during which the world has changed a great deal. But we're going to discuss some of the things that never change, the eternal truths of Sanatana Dharma, which are the traditions are associated with South Asia, popularly known as Hinduism. One of the things that's happened since I last spoke to Acharya in 2017 is that I myself got to go to India, and where I offered prayers at a number of ancient temples, puja to Shiva, Chamunda, Ayana, and other gods. And I learned more about my family history there because by chance I got to visit the grave of one of my ancestors who lived in India. And I consider that a very auspicious thing. And then later, last year, I found some documents that proved that my great-grandfather in India was actually a practitioner of yoga, and that he had a yogi. And I found a portrait in his possessions of a man who I believe to have been his yogi. It appears to be a Brahmin, and I can't imagine any other reason why he kept that portrait if it wasn't to someone close to him. So it appears to be that person. So I have, since 2017, become very renewed, increasing interest in Indian religion, which I already had when I spoke to Acharya last. And I consider, as I've said to my viewers before, the Indian religion an extremely valuable source of wisdom for those who practice similar traditions, namely pre-Christian European traditions, which have some common roots with the Indian traditions. So I myself incorporate the Vedic prayers, or the structure and form of Vedic prayers, into prayers that I offer to my gods. And when listening to Acharya, who will dispense his wisdom this evening, it's important to remember that there's all sorts of ways this can be relevant to you, even if you are not a practitioner of Sanatana Dharma. But we'll get into that. First off, I'd like if you please, Acharya, explain your title for those who aren't familiar with these kind of things.
Sure, absolutely. And first, before I do that, first of all, Tom, let me thank you very much for having me on again. Yes, it hasn't indeed been 5 years since we did our last interview, and I know that that interview and that video was extremely popular. Many tens of thousands of people saw it. And it's absolutely wonderful to be on here on your show again. And let me say, I have seen the growth that your show has gone through in the last 5 years. And congratulations on your success. I forget how many subscribers you had on YouTube when you first interviewed me, but it was nowhere near the number that it is now. And you deserve it. Your show is phenomenal. I can't say I watch every single episode because you put out too much content, but I watch a lot of your videos, actually. And I'm always amazed at how you bring together a perfect combination of, on the one hand, academic excellence, while on the other hand, also speaking as a practitioner. So not just some cold, objective sort of professor, but again, you bring heart to all of your shows. So it is absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I'm glad to see that the Dharma Nation channel has grown considerably as well since you've launched it, which is very well deserved. And I enjoy watching some of your talks on there similarly. So I recommend everyone to go and check that out. I think I forgot to put the link in the description, but I will put it into the chat now. While Acharya please explains his title.
Absolutely. And yes, it is a long name, Sri Dharma Pravartaka Acharya. And very often people have difficulty with it. But yes, just to explain it very, very simply, my actual name in that whole construct is Dharma Pravartaka. That is the name that my first guru gave me. His name was Sri Yatiraja Acharya, and he gave me that name when I was approximately 14, and it is a spiritual name. And what it means very specifically in the English language is he who sets Dharma in motion. That's what Dharma Pravartaka means. The word Sri is, it's simply an honorific. So if there's someone who's respected, not just a guru, interestingly, in India today, anyone who's respected, they will often be called Sri so-and-so and then their surname. So that's what Sri means. The translation is auspicious. It's one of the names of Lakshmi Devi, one of the most important goddesses. But then Acharya is my actual title. And Acharya means a spiritual preceptor. It is an individual who, it's higher than a guru, interestingly. A guru, you can have any sort of guru. Guru simply means teacher. You can have a sitar guru. You can have a martial arts guru. Not all gurus necessarily are overtly spiritual gurus, but an acharya is a preceptor, meaning that they represent an actual spiritual lineage within the tradition of Sanatana Dharma. So thus, when you hear the title acharya, not always in the modern era, but usually it means you're speaking to someone who represents the Vedic tradition in a very traditional, very authentic sort of way, as opposed to mixed with modern New Ageism or anything like that. So that's why you don't hear the title Acharya very often, just once in a while. So that's the explanation of my full name, which indeed with everything tends to be a little bit long, but people can just call me Acharya or Acharya-ji.
Thank you, Acharya. So I'd like to ask about what's happened to in your life as a teacher and a devotee of Sanatana Dharma. How over the last 5 years, how has that changed? And I know your activities online seem to have increased in that time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And thank you for asking, actually. Yes, interestingly, many people may not be aware of this, but this has been the case the entire time that I've been teaching, or at least let's say for the last 24 years or so. In addition to what I do online, that is the videos, live streams, all the books that I have published, etc. I also have a movement, and it is a nonprofit religious movement, not a business, not anything else. It is a religious movement, and it's called the International Sanatana Dharma Society. So in addition to the things that I do online, this is a movement in real life. And this is what we especially have been focusing on. And this movement itself has become quite global in nature. We have students now in, roughly 70 or 80 nations throughout the world. Yes, we have literally people everywhere who are involved with this movement. And the International Sanatana Dharma Society, its sole purpose is indeed to restore the Vedic tradition in its pristine form and in a very practical way, extending even beyond religion. Our goal is quite literally to bring Dharma back to this planet in every single way. And that means politically, economically, culturally, etc. So this is the main thing that I've been working on for the last, again, really 24 years, really 30 years in a way. But it has grown exponentially to the point where I'm just guesstimating every year we double in size, it seems. So I've been focusing on that very much. I've been still putting out books. Again, as of right now, I have approximately 10 books that are published. And if you don't mind, if I show the audience, actually, this is our latest book. It's called Introduction to Sanatana Dharma. And this book just came out less than a year ago. And interestingly, it's a book that was very much needed. And to the point where this book now sells more than all of our other books combined, which is truly astounding. So that has come out, as well as other books as well. And more books are going to be coming out in the near future. So a long answer, because a lot has been going on. But indeed, the ISDS and myself, we have been growing exponentially for the last 5 years. So thank you for asking.
I'm glad to hear about the new books and things. Myself, I've neglected that area, and I need to take a leaf out of your book, so to speak. But as an adherent of Vedantic philosophy, I was quite interested to hear, and sorry to begin with a question that isn't directly pertaining to Vedanta and Sanatana Dharma, but in paganism, there's often some debate about whether the way that Hindu or Sanatana Dharma has as a philosophy a kind of polytheism with a monotheistic core. If probably everyone will find that description offensive, but
I actually think that's a very good description.
At least you don't. But it's hard to say. But there are many gods in the Indian tradition, but there is an essential idea that they're all one, or that they all pertain to one higher God. And people debate whether similar ideas existed in European pre-Christian religion, because there isn't any explicit mention of this belief in most of them. However, there is one exception, and that's among the discussions of Greek philosophers and Roman philosophers, for that matter, of the Neoplatonic school, who have some shared beliefs with the Vedanta, in the sense that they have the Platonic conception of the one, an ineffable one, who is like a prime mover above the gods, or of which the gods are manifestations. And Iamblichus took that even further, calling it, instead of an ineffable one, but the utterly ineffable. So they didn't worship this as a god like they would Zeus or the other gods, but they believed that Zeus and all the gods were of this ineffable thing. So I tend to have a similar view, and I don't worship this this ineffable being or non-being directly, because I think it's better to worship indirectly via the gods that are more easy to conceive of with a limited human mind. But I just would like to know what you think of this this kind of belief among Neoplatonists, and to what extent you consider this a perennial belief that existed around the world at all.
Mm-hmm. Excellent first question. Actually, that is a very, very good question. And it is something that I would love to address, actually, because I know Platonism and Neoplatonism quite well. In fact, to the point where when I was in undergraduate school, I started learning Latin with the idea of studying Roman philosophy in comparison with Vedanta, but that's another story. But when it comes, first of all, to address what you first stated, and that is the idea of polytheism versus monotheism, both in Vedic spirituality, but then again in many other allied traditions as well. Again, I think you stated very, very well. The externality of, let's say, Dharmic religion looks polytheistic in that there are indeed many divine beings who are recognized, many beneficent beings, gods and goddesses, but then also other beings as well, terrestrial, celestial, atmospheric gods, etc. These beings are indeed recognized. They are propitiated. They are seen as beings who are good, who we should seek help from, etc. On the one hand, but on the other hand, as you said, the core certainly of Sanatana Dharma, but I would argue many, if not all, of the pre-Christian European religions is ultimately monotheistic, ultimately with the idea that beyond the gods, there is indeed a first principle. There is the ultimate one, the ultimate good, whatever you want to call it. There are myriad of names. And this is what would correspond to philosophically what we would call God. Now, I have to say philosophically what we would call God, because, of course, I've seen that many people, unfortunately, just due to a lack of knowledge or preconceptions, have this unfortunate idea that when they hear about the notion of God or a supreme being above all other beings, they unfortunately tend to make the mistake of thinking that, oh, that's Abrahamic, that's Christian or Jewish or Islamic or something like that, not understanding that in actuality, no, the pre-Abrahamic religions also believed in the same thing. Again, you were mentioning how, and I agree with you actually, it seems out of all the, let's say, currently practiced forms of pre-Christian European religions, it's especially the Hellenismos and Roman religion, so the Greco-Roman religion, both historically but also today, that also have this same idea very well developed. Now, looking at historically, looking at the past, oh, indeed, if you look at Plato, and then of course Socrates, his teacher, if you look at Aristotle, if you look at absolutely Plotinus of the so-called Neoplatonic school, Iamblichus, just so many people who are there, Porphyry. And first of all, let me just say, personally, I don't accept this notion of Platonism versus Neoplatonism. I consider them the same, as do all of the so-called Neoplatonists. They consider themselves to be Platonists. You would agree with that?
I certainly agree. Yeah, I think that's increasingly being accepted among scholars in general.
Yeah, I think this is a modern artificial division, Platonism versus Neoplatonism, but that's a different story. When it comes to, again, let's say advanced Greco-Roman philosophy, yes, they upheld the same idea. They believed in the gods, you propitiate the gods. Yes, there are all the various gods and goddesses who we recognize in the Greek and Roman pantheon on the one hand. On the other hand, it's understood that even these beings are indeed temporary. Oh, they may live for millions of years, however long, but ultimately there is one divine principle that is both above them, who they are ontologically dependent upon, and who is their source. So this was, again, accepted by all the better known Greco-Roman philosophers, including Plotinus. And when it comes to Plotinus, yes, I read the Aeneads a very, very long time ago, multiple times. But the first time I read his collected works was a very long time ago. And it's interesting. I believe I was, again, an undergraduate at Loyola University the first time I read his work. And I was astounded at indeed how Vedantic his ideas sounded. So, for example, the idea of the one in common language we would call God. This is the equivalent of Brahman in indeed Vedanta. So again, not Brahma, the creator being, that's the demiurge, but rather Brahman, who in all of Vedanta, that means in the Upanishads, in the Brahma Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, and so many different works, Brahman is described in almost the exact same way as the one. That is a being who is simple in nature, simple meaning that it's non-composite, a being who, again, is ontologically transcendent, that transcends all other beings, that is the source of all other beings, that is the sustainer of all other beings, etc. And even to the point where I would agree with many of the later Neoplatonic philosophers in that this being also is ineffable. It is a being that ultimately cannot be approached by mere intellect alone, and that cannot be fully described by language alone. Rather, these two modes of knowing and communicating are pointers. You can point to what that ultimate is, and certainly I also agree with the idea of, again, of many Neoplatonists that a via negativa is a very good, let's say, beginning approach. In other words, you want to know what is the nature of the one. Well, understand what the one is not, and in that way, you begin to come to an understanding of that through that via negativa of understanding what is the nature of the one. And I can go on and on. I don't want to give us a summary of Platonic philosophy, but all this being said, again, there is absolutely nothing that I have read in Plotinus that I would disagree. Even when it comes to this triad, the notion of the one versus nous, that is intellect versus soul. What we would say from a Vedantic perspective is that indeed the one, again, is Brahman. Intellect equates essentially to what would be called the demiurge in some traditions, or Brahma. And indeed, it's interesting how, again, the parallels are stunning. The idea of Brahma is that Brahma is a secondary creator, in that Brahma creates the universe. So again, he is the demiurge, what would be called the demiurge in quote unquote Neoplatonism, a lot of Gnosticism, etc. But at the same time, he is a being who is composed of pure intellect, what's called in Sanskrit buddhi, pure intellect. And again, the correlations are astounding. Soul, of course, being the myriad individual atmans who, or that is spirit souls who find themselves currently within the material world. The one area in which we would disagree, and it's arguable how much Plotinus himself even made this argument, but I know that several other Neoplatonists and people somewhat influenced by them made this argument, like the Manichaeans, for example. And that is the idea that materiality is overtly evil. This is something that we would disagree with. We don't see materiality as overtly evil. We see our presence within materiality, as opposed to our own self-imposed illusion, as being a negative, as being something bad. But materiality itself is not seen as an evil.
I don't think all Neoplatonists or Platonists thought of the material as evil. I personally think of that as a Gnostic kind of thing, but I think there's some debate. People more knowledgeable about the subject than me may have input to say, but there might be disputes among the Platonists as well. Yeah, but I think certainly not all of them are.
No, not all, but a few. And there is a lot of crossover, unfortunately, between Neoplatonism and Gnosticism.
Mm. Well, that was really fascinating answer. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Maybe I should. This is one of my questions. Before some people started sending in super chat questions, and we'll get to them at the end. Thank you for sending them in. One from Liquid Oxygen, but I must request that please limit your questions to Acharya to those that are about his area of expertise, specifically of Sanatana Dharma, the Vedas, the Indian holy books and things like that, rather than other traditions. So the question that came through was about your opinion on the comparison with Zoroastrianism. But if you have time later, we can get to that. But we'll go through some other questions first. I don't want to make this too topical about the current events, so we won't mention the war. But in the Bhagavad Gita, I think it was interesting that Arjuna is advised by Krishna to fight in a war against his own kinsfolk, which would normally be adharmic. It would be something you shouldn't kill your kinsman. But Krishna says that it would, in this instance, it is the acceptable and right thing to do. So from a Dharmic perspective, without being too political concerning the war that's now on, does it matter very much which side a warrior fights for in a war?
Excellent question. Very, very good question. And actually a very complex question, or the answer will probably be a little bit complex. First of all, as far as the concept of war in Sanatana Dharma, it's similar to, again, a lot of many ancient traditions. And that is that, first of all, war is, of course, a bad thing. War should be avoided as much as is possible. We believe in peace. All the ancient peoples, the noble individuals among the ancient peoples, the Arya, the noble ones, of course, all believed in peace, all believed that, no, we should not be killing each other unnecessarily. But that's the key word, unnecessarily. Sometimes, of course, war does indeed become a necessity. So if you're protecting your nation from invasion, for example, or something like this, and that being the case, when indeed there is no other recourse other than to have war, the idea is that indeed you can engage in warfare as a warrior in such a way that you can spiritualize your situation. In other words, now having been thrust into war, the idea is that you can indeed spiritualize the very act of being a warrior and being in war. So as far as the concept of war, again, it's something to be avoided. But once you are engaged in war, it has to be for a good reason, a virtuous, noble, righteous reason, and you are to give yourself to that cause completely. This is why, for example, interestingly, Krishna was encouraging Arjuna, as you said, to engage in war. Ordinarily, of course, you don't engage in any sort of battle with relatives, but this was a stark situation where some relatives were on the side of good, of dharma. Some relatives, sadly, were on the side of adharma. That is, had the other side won, dharma itself would no longer have been upheld in the kingdom. And that's a very stark situation. Now, getting to the question that you actually asked, can you please just remind me what was the last thing that you said, the actual question?
Yes, sure. I just wanted to know, to what extent does it matter which side the warrior is
I
fighting?
see. Okay. Okay. It does and it does not in different senses. So on the one hand, if one is going to engage in war, if you have a choice and if you can discern which is which, you always want to try to be on the side of good. Always. So if it's a matter of choice and you truly know beyond any doubt whatsoever that, oh, this side is fighting for dharma, that is, they're fighting for truth, for goodness, for justice, for righteousness, etc., and the other side is the opposite, they're fighting for horrible, evil things, well, you should always do everything in your power to try to make sure that you're fighting for what is good. Now, this leads to the next question, which actually I believe is your question. That is, what about those soldiers who they believe that they are fighting for good? They may or may not be, but nonetheless, they believe that they are, and they throw themselves selflessly into a war, into a battle, to the point where, oh yes, they get injured, they may even die in the battle. But again, as far as themselves, with the knowledge that they had, they did so in, again, a noble sort of way, with courage, etc. Well, interestingly, Vedic spirituality recognizes that if it is indeed the case that even if you're on the wrong side, but you are fighting innocently and nobly, believing that you're fighting for the right side, if you die courageously and righteously in warfare, you go to Svarga, you go to the heavenly realm. So, in other words, as long as you are a true warrior who you're fighting righteously, at least in your own estimation, and if you die courageously, then you will have a good destiny after that. So that's the idea. So it's kind of, on the one hand, you want to strive to fight for good, but even if you make the mistake and you think you're fighting for good, but really you're not, still, you will go to a good destination if you die courageously and if you were a righteous warrior.
Thank you very much for clarifying. I think that's very similar to what you see in Homer's writings and in the Norse religion too, where it's very high focus on the conduct of the individual, and his ethnic allegiances aren't his choice. So he has to fight for what his people are fighting for, regardless.
Yes. Exactly.
I'd also like, this is a more technical question. And people ask it to me, so I thought it best to ask you, because you might have more, well, you will have more knowledge on the subject and be able to give a better answer than I could, which is basically, do you have particular translations you recommend of the Rig Veda, the Bhagavad Gita, or the entire Mahabharata, the main holy texts that people are interested in checking out, but they're not sure, which translation is the one to go for?
Sure, absolutely. And of course, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of texts. So I won't recommend good translations for all of them, but a few. And let me just say, first of all, sadly, when it comes to translations of the majority of these Vedic texts, sadly, a lot of them are not good. A lot of them just aren't good translations. So there are some works where I would not recommend one translation over another. The truth is, we just need new translations, updated translations with people who are proficient Sanskritists, but who also understand philosophy, etc., and most importantly, who are also practitioners of the Vedic religion. So many of these works will have to indeed be retranslated in the future, something that actually our movement hopes to work on in the future. But there are a few translations that I can indeed recommend. As far as Bhagavad Gita itself, absolutely the translation done by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And that is the best translation that I have read. And let me tell you, I don't say that lightly. I have personally read, I don't know how many, but dozens and dozens of English translations of
His
Bhagavad
is
Gita.
quite a popular one that people will be able to get quite easily, I think, as
Yeah,
well.
and truthfully, looking, because I know Sanskrit, I translate from Sanskrit myself. Looking at the Sanskrit, looking at his translations, not every verse is perfectly translated, but most of them are. They really do keep to the spirit of what is being said. However, with that, I also have to say, you want to get what is called the 1972 Macmillan edition of Bhagavad Gita as it is by Prabhupada. The more recent edition, sadly, has been changed in ways that are not good and not in keeping with the spirit of the original. As far as Mahabharata, there are only, I believe, and I could be off because I'm going by knowledge from when I was in graduate school, there are, I believe, 2 full translations of Mahabharata, but there is a good summary study by Kamala Subramaniam. If you look up her name, Kamala is her first name, Subramaniam. This edition is, I forget, 800, 900 pages, and it's a short summary study of the totality of the Mahabharata, but it's extremely well done. Again, it's like reading a summary of Mahabharata. The entire Mahabharata, the one that I read, that is the full translation, is 12 volumes in length, because Mahabharata is enormous. It's 110,000 couplets. It is by far the longest epic ever written in the history of humanity. In fact, longer than many, many of the other epics combined. So again, for a nice summary, and even that is 800 or 900 pages. Kamala Subramaniam. As far as the Upanishads, it's on a case-by-case basis. And again, I wouldn't, with a good heart, I wouldn't be able to recommend translations that don't have flaws in them. Most of the translations do. Again, in the future, many of these works will have to be retranslated by individuals who are good Sanskritists, who understand philosophy, and who are practitioners. Because that's been the problem with translations in the past, is at least one of those elements has been missing as far as the translators themselves.
I know when it comes to the Rig Veda that a lot of people rely on the Griffith one. I think that's partly because it's old and partly because it's available online for free. I've always just read that one mainly, but I've got now a copy of the Wendy Doniger version. Do you know if this one's any good?
I know Wendy Doniger. I know her translation. I'll try to state this as kindly, but as also accurately as I can. That's the worst translation that exists.
Okay. Well,
was that undiplomatic? I'm sorry if it was.
no,
again,
I haven't read it myself, that version yet.
I met her when I was again a graduate student. She came to Madison, Wisconsin for a conference. It's a bad translation. It's a very bad translation. It is a modern translation. It's an updated one, but unfortunately, I'll try to state this as unpolitically but accurately as possible. It's woke.
Oh dear.
As is she.
Oh well. I should have tried to get a different version. Can you tell me which version you do recommend for the Rig Veda?
Again, the Griffith one is fine, actually. It's fine. I don't like it's older English. It's a little bit difficult for people to follow. This is the other thing, very technically speaking. The one reason why it's difficult to translate Rig Veda is because it is written in Vedic Sanskrit as opposed to classical Sanskrit. And that is a distinction that even a lot of people who understand Hinduism quite well, they don't understand that Sanskrit is not Sanskrit. there are two main forms of Sanskrit. There are really more, but two main ones, Vedic versus classical. And with Vedic Sanskrit, there are elements in the grammar, but also pronunciation, a few of which we actually don't even understand today. The knowledge, some of the knowledge has been lost. So therefore, in translating Rig Veda, there will always be a lot of room for speculation. And that's the difficulty. And that's why, again, as I was saying, it ultimately will need to be translated by someone who is a very good Sanskritist, and in Vedic Sanskrit, that layer of Sanskrit, who understands philosophy, and I mean philosophy in the broadest sense, but who also is a practitioner. Because with the Rig Veda, it's also understood within the Vedic tradition for thousands of years. It's been understood that more so than, let's say, reading the four Vedas, or actually four Vedas, in a straightforward sort of way, the way that you would read any other sort of work, even a scripture. More than anything, these are hymns. You know, rik means kind of like a devotional hymn. That's where you get rig from, Rig Veda. And these are meant to be recited more so than read or studied. You know, the purpose of Rig Veda is not so much to, again, read and study them in a straightforward way, as opposed to hearing them, hearing the divine sound vibration. This is why if you hear extremely well-trained, authentic Vedic priests as they're reciting any of the Vedas, more than anything, it's an experience. It's meant to be experiential as opposed to philosophical. So I don't know if that answers the question, but again, I would not feel good recommending a current translation of Rig Veda, sadly.
Well,
that's saying a lot that I can't recommend one. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed to learn that my translation is not a good one, that the one I own. But yeah, it's good to know in advance so I don't get pulled into a mistranslation, misleading translation. I did want to return to one of the audience questions that we had, because part of the question was within the Dharmic perspective. He wanted to know your opinion on the Vedic religion of the Kailash people and their relations to other Vedic practices. I suppose do you have any opinion on their differences from wider religious practice in India?
Oh, sure. I know who the Kailash people are. They are a group of individuals who are in current day Pakistan, who they absolutely represent one of the earlier, let's say, ethnic streams of the Indo-European peoples. They indeed practice Vedic religion, but it is practiced in such a way that it's quite different from modern day Hinduism. So, for example, if you were to observe how the Kailash practice their religion versus, let's say you're in Mumbai or New Delhi or someplace like this, the practices are radically different. The reason why that's the case is because, indeed, they represent an older strata, let's say, of Sanatana Dharma. That being the case, it also has to be understood. Two things have to be understood, actually. First of all, that, of course, due to centuries and centuries of both isolation and persecution, isolation mostly because of Zoroastrianism to their west, persecution because of Islam all surrounding them. Of course, there have been a lot of alterations. There has been a little bit of watering down, etc. So when you look at the religion of the Kailash people, on the one hand, some elements of it are extremely ancient and extremely authentic and traditional, but then some elements, again, are the result of encroachment from others and a lot of persecution, etc. That's the first thing I want to say about this. The other thing is this second element. I would argue that it's not just the Kailash people, but that in actuality, you can find strains of Vedic religion all throughout the world in little pockets like this. So, for example, I consider the Yazidi, of modern day Iraq, a people who it's only been for most people, it's only been, since the growth of ISIS that anyone's even heard about these people. I've known about the Yazidi for 40 years. The Yazidi people, their religion is also considered to be very, very similar to Vedic religion, even to the point where, again, people may not be aware of this. Among the Yazidi themselves, since their persecution at the hands of ISIS, many Yazidi leaders now overtly say our tradition is part of Sanatana Dharma.
Really?
Yes, really. Again, very few people are aware of this, but out of almost.
I saw in India and Sri Lanka the events, religious and otherwise, where they would use a tall brass or peacock-topped sort of oil lamp, and the Yazidi carry these around in their festival, and they use this peacock standard as like a holy implement they pass from village to village in festivals. And it's like that peacock thing is exactly like they have in India. I just thought it was a bit strange.
How interesting is this? I have one in our temple here.
Oh, right.
It's not tall, it's shorter, but yes, we actually have something like that here. Yes, the peacock is a Vedic symbol, and of course, among the Yazidi, it's something that's very sacred to them. But I can give hundreds of examples of smaller groups who, to lesser or greater degrees, they are followers of Sanatana Dharma. And interestingly, whether they call themselves that or not, and again, as far as why maybe they wouldn't, again, centuries of persecution, just so much time having gone by between the ancient times when they followed their various religions a lot more purely versus now with the encroachment of modernity. But I would say personally that there are hundreds and hundreds of religions and cultures throughout the world who, again, whether they consciously call themselves Sanatana Dharma or not, they are. So yeah, so it's very interesting. So the Kailash, the Yazidis, and again, there are many groups like this who, as far as I'm concerned, they're following Sanatana Dharma. For that matter, as far as I'm concerned, truly ancient pre-Christian European religion was an expression of Sanatana Dharma also. And that's something I've written extensively and even more talked extensively about.
I had a couple of people asking about 5 years ago. You said, I've seen two people asking different ways. They've posed a question. You said in the stream that you thought, although we're in this dark age, the Kali Yuga, that you had some optimism and that there could be a sort of an age of light, a mini golden age within a Kali Yuga, like little. Do you still hold that optimism?
Even more so. Even more so. And yes, actually, if I could address that, because that is one of the themes that I'm known for speaking about very, very deeply and extensively, and that I have for decades. Yes, this is the idea, first speaking about this in the largest sense, but then narrowing it down to our current date, practically. The idea, of course, is that we are indeed in an era that in Sanskrit is called the Kali Yuga. And there are 4 ages. The Kali Yuga is the last of them, and they descend as far as quality. So, the idea is not qualitative evolution, as is the case with many atheists and Marxists, etc. But all the ancients, this is not just a Vedic idea. Again, all the ancients believe that no, we're devolving, actually, qualitatively in every way, morally, as far as righteousness, nobility, even intelligence, culture, etc., etc., etc. So with that in mind, we are living in the worst of ages. We're living in the Kali Yuga. We're living in an age that is the most materialistic of ages. We're living in an age where the challenges to any person who wishes to be noble, the challenges are tremendous. And we know this because I know the sorts of people you have in your audience. These are all individuals who wish to celebrate nobility and righteousness and the ancient. And the idea is that we're living in truly a terrible dark age right now. Now, this age goes on. It only started a little over 5,100 years ago. And the totality of the Kali Yuga is 432,000 years. So it's a long age. But despite that fact, there are ages within each age. So in other words, even within the Kali Yuga, there are ups and then downs, and then there are ups and then downs. The general progression is downward, but there are little respites from the darkness and the evil that we experience in this age. Mini golden ages, one could call them. And indeed, one of them is coming up. One of them is coming up imminently to the point where, indeed, I tell people, unless I'm speaking to someone very elderly, if you're, let's say, under the age of 60, you will live to see the beginning, at least, of a mini golden age that we're about to enter. The Vedic scriptures talk about this. Interestingly, it does correspond, New Age nonsense aside, talking about real religion, it does indeed correspond with the Mayans and 2012, etc., and many other prophecies, actually. It's not just the Mayans, not just Vedic. But indeed, we are about to enter into a mini golden age. But as I have been telling people for 30, 35 years now, first things are going to get bad before they get good. And indeed, of course, we've seen this. And we've seen specifically, getting back to one of your very first questions, and that is the last 5 years. Oh, my God. Not just my life, for everyone who's been around for the last 5 years. We have seen things on our planet, the likes of which we have never seen historically. And I don't even need to give a list. We know. We know how the world has gone insane, both for good and for bad. How on the one hand, we see greater and greater oppression, censorship, tyranny, etc. We see all these bad things happening, the coarsening of the culture, etc., etc. A long list that I or anyone can give. But we also interestingly see a corresponding great awakening that is happening among all the intelligent people on this planet. We see people waking up to all the problems and what is the source of all these problems. And indeed, we see a yearning for truth, for goodness, for a golden age, the likes of which we have not seen in who knows how long. So this is what I tell people, is that things will continue to get worse for a little bit longer. As far as what that means, a few months, a year, 2 years, who knows? But then we are going to indeed truly see a great awakening that is going to transform the face of this planet, the face of the earth. And it's going to be truly a golden age, not the golden age. It's not going to be as great as things were in the Satya Yuga, the true golden age that was millions of years ago. But things are indeed going to become extremely good. We will see justice in this world. We will see people celebrating truth, getting very, very close to nature again. Indeed, we will even begin to see the reemergence of the gods upon our planet. We are going to begin to see all of these various nature beings, spirits of nature, begin to come back. What we're going to see is going to be something that's miraculous. And again, Tom, I'm not sure how old you are, but you'll see it in your lifetime.
I hope so. I hope you're right. I certainly think that there's an increasing awareness of an interest in the gods of old, and the growth of my channel is part of that. And so I hope that it is accompanied by a metaphysical phenomenon and a change in the historical direction. So yeah, I do hope you're right. And on the subject of this Kali Yuga, this era of decline, and the many things that are concerning about it, one that I'm often concerned about, and many of my viewers will be too, and ask me about, is the rise of philosophies that seek to transcend the human, but not in a conventionally traditional way, like transcendence as in that which pertains to the above or to the divine, but rather to a purely materialistic way, which is to entrench the human in the material even further, and referring to things like the post-human conception and transhumanism, for example. And we see all sorts of quite fascinating and interesting developments in technology, which some of them may be quite beneficial in certain respects, but they're also concerning because we have ethical questions to consider relating to them, such as the development of artificial intelligence, which may or may not be possible. Some people assure me that it certainly isn't possible, but or intelligence, true intelligence anyway. But artificial or the increasing automation of work that was many people enjoyed this types of labor in the past, and now it's being, passed on to machines. And of course, advancements in genetic engineering and gene modification, CRISPR and things like that, where you can change the fundamental genetic makeup of the human being. And there are philosophies attached to this technological advancement which seek to redefine what it is to be human. And these philosophies are very much associated with the halls of power in the global elite. So they are worth considering for all people who are religious, and they should consider what are the religious and traditional perspectives on these new phenomena. And so that's what I'd like to ask you, Acharya, please, to tell us what is the Dharmic perspective on transhumanism and related ideologies.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. Very, very good question. A very, very, very big question, very broad question that, we probably won't be able to address fully, but at least hopefully we can begin to touch upon this from the Vedic perspective. First of all, it's not so much a matter of these being philosophies, because truthfully, there's really nothing overtly philosophical about these ideas. Rather, they're ideologies. And it's a very important distinction to make when it comes to actual philosophy. When it comes to, for example, a debate between an individual who is a spiritual individual who actually knows philosophy well versus one of these people. These people are usually defeated within about 120 seconds or so. They have ideologies. They have worldviews that they are committed to, regardless of anything. Indeed, I've spoken with individuals who consider themselves to be transhumanists, for example, and they tend to be more fanatical than thoughtful. But that all aside, Vedic spirituality is opposed to any sort of artificial attempt to alter what it means to be human, and artificial attempt, because I saw that you were indeed making this distinction between transhumanism in the artificial sense, which is what 99.9% of these individuals are pointing to, versus the idea of indeed transcending what it means to be merely human in a spiritual sense. And that is to not merely be constrained with all of the faults of what it means, all the personal faults of what it means to be human, but indeed to go beyond this, to go beyond our illusion, to go beyond our constraints that are there internally as a result of our illusion and misidentification with the material. That's something different. That's actual transhumanism. For that matter, it's transmaterialism. And this is the difficulty, is exactly what you were pointing to. Spiritual transhumanism, for lack of a better term, is indeed transmaterialism. In other words, it's the idea of going beyond mere appearance and truly embracing who we are as our essential spiritual transcendent being. That's a good thing. On the other hand, the transhumanist project, as is enunciated by most of these people who call themselves transhumanists, it's quite literally the opposite. It is the idea of merging with machines, one could say. It's the idea of merging with technology. It's the idea of, rather than ontologically elevating ourselves qualitatively, it's the idea of indeed merging ourselves with the artificial, with that which is below us, because technology is below the humans, since humans created it, with the idea of essentially becoming man machines. And of course, I'm using machines in a slightly facetious way, meaning all technology. And the idea is indeed to entrap ourselves further in materiality. See, this is both the Vedic, but also really the teachings of all the ancients, including Neoplatonism. The idea is that in actuality, we are beings who are eternal units of consciousness, who are presently inhabiting lower form, that is materiality. That's the idea of all the ancients, and the idea is indeed to transcend materiality. The idea of transhumanism is that in addition to our being trapped within a material body, they want to now entrap us even further in things that are below, elementally, even below that of a material body. It reminds me of Plato, actually. And when they asked him why he didn't like the idea of fiction, why he didn't like the idea of plays, he said something to the effect of, well, I don't watch plays. And the reason why is because we're already in an illusion. Well, if I'm sitting there watching a play, then I'm in an illusion in an illusion. So in a similar sort of way, this is the difficulty in attempting to extend our life and so-called material powers by merging our consciousness, whatever these people would like to call it. They're not even sure what they mean, merging our minds into elements that are below even the human body. So this is, again, not so much a philosophy, it's an ideology, and it arises from what in Sanskrit we would call asura marga, that is the path of the demons. So as a result, we reject transhumanism, we reject artificial manipulation of genes, et cetera, et cetera. Rather, we believe truly in doing everything in accordance with Dharma, in accordance with natural law, and with the idea of elevating ourselves in who we are, not artificially, not merging ourselves in technology or computers or machines, etc., but rather elevating ourselves in who we are in our essence in such a way that we acquire wisdom, that we acquire peace, that we have self-realization, and then ultimately God realization, and we have the ability to transcend all illusion and materiality altogether. That's the Vedic goal. So I hope that answers the question. That's in the smallest of nutshells. I could go on
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah, beautifully. I'd like to hear you speak more on the matter. I gather you said you talked on it on your channel in the past. I'll try and find the video, the relevant video, because it's such an important topic in this day and age, and one to consider. I'm trying to give it some consideration myself, and I want to discuss it more in public. There was another chat from a super chat from a audience member. Kirill Petrov asks about your thoughts on the role of the free will of the individual during the Kali Yuga, if there is true free will during this age, or indeed, I suppose widely you could ask, what is the Dharmic perspective on free will? Because free will is a wider philosophical discussion that that existed within pagan Europe and Christian Europe, and was not agreed fully in either. So it's a big question as well. So see if you can condense it
in just a few minutes. Sure, absolutely. Well, I can certainly discuss this from the Vedic perspective. The Vedic perspective is that indeed free will is actually inherent to our very soul. It's called sankalpa, and it's one of the attributes of soul. So as living beings, we have free will. You see this even in animals. You see this in all living beings, that there's that idea of free will. But free will, of course, being in materiality, is often constrained by external factors. This is true in accordance with what sort of body you have. So, for example, a bird has the free will to choose to suddenly fly because it enjoys flying. I don't have, I have free will, but I'm constrained. I would like to fly right now, but I'm constrained in accordance with the body I have, etc. So when it comes to free will is an absolute fact. But what is also an absolute fact is that for most people who are in illusion within the material world, that free will is artificially constrained as far as what we can actually do with it. This is why sometimes people will get confused and say, oh, no, there is no free will. No, there is. The vast majority of individuals, however, are not exercising that free will as much as they could if not only if they had free will, but if they combine that with a free mind. Number one, as humans, but also, again, the actual constraints of physics, of what sort of body you have, etc. So free will is something that's very important.
Sorry to interrupt, but what about the constraints of destiny or fate? Is that a factor as well to consider?
Yes, it is. So what we would call karma in the Sanskrit language. Yes, there is indeed such a thing as destiny in accordance with our karma. But even with that, interestingly, the idea is that karma is not something, the causality of which lies outside of ourselves. Rather, we create our own karma. So, let's say tomorrow I'm in a car accident and I'm suddenly paralyzed. My legs are paralyzed. One could say, whoa, that's fate, and it had nothing to do with my free will. Well, that's karma, however. So at some point in a previous lifetime, I chose to pursue a course of action that now led to that reaction. So ultimately, it all does indeed come back to free will. So even when it comes to destiny, it's not that some being outside of ourselves arbitrarily just decided, oh, I'm going to do this with this specific human being. No, we create our own destiny. We create our future. And that is the idea of karma, is that with every ethical decision that we make, we are literally creating who we will be in the future, what will happen to us, what our situation and station will be in life. So even karma itself, what we would call fate, destiny, is itself, if anything, a manifestation of free will. It's just a matter of what is the effect of which free will was the cause. And sometimes when that effect comes, yes, we have to face that effect. It's kind of like, I'm sorry for the negative example, but I decide of my own free will to take a gun and shoot myself. I did that of my own free will. Once I have shot myself, then I have to suffer the effects of what I chose of my free will. But free will, again, is ultimately the foundation of who we are as living beings.
Thank you very much for clarifying that, Acharya. That's fascinating. Well, I feel like we could go for another hour quite easily. There's so much interesting wisdom being dispensed, but I'm afraid we can't. So we'll have to draw this interview to a close. And thank you very much for joining us again, Acharya. It's been a pleasure to have you as my guest on Jive Talk. I'd like to thank the audience as well for participating. For the first time, I'm streaming simultaneously on Odyssey and on YouTube, and it seems to have gone to plan, surprisingly. There is a new video coming out very soon on my channel, on the main channel, Survive the Jive, to keep an eye on, which involves some comparative mythology. Would you like to mention again, Acharya, for those who have forgotten, your latest book and where it can be purchased by any audience members interested?
Sure, absolutely. Well, in fact, I'll even show you. The latest book is called Introduction to Sanatana Dharma. Very, very simple title. And it's available on Amazon. It's really available anywhere if you go to any search engine, but especially if you go to Amazon, it's available there. It's also available on our main website, dharmacentral.com. And indeed, most, if not all, of our books are available there at dharmacentral.com. And again, that is also the main website for the movement that I lead.
Thank you once again. Okay, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed Jive Talk tonight. I'll try and get some more interviews in soon, and I hope you enjoyed this evening. Good night and stay well and survive the jive.
Very good. Thank you, Tom.